Okay, let's see. And everybody just look your camera, and I can actually cut down the 3, 2, 1. Just to give me a moment. Let's make a snap up second time. Okay.
Good.
Very nice. Yeah. Thank you so much. 3, 2, 1. Yep. Looks like a very good snap picture and the group picture of our webinar. Thank you so much. And now I can actually give floor to Hans Martin to share his and his team's and the latest research results about this topic. Hans Martin?
Yeah, thank you very much, Wang Yu. Oh, actually, I'm not allowed to share my screen. It says the host has not activated this function.
Oh.
So I would ask
if you don't mind, I can share your presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you just let me know if you wanted to. You just let me know which page you're going to go, and just let me know. Let's see which one is full screen. Now it's full screen, right?
Not full screen exactly, but I think we can all read it. I'm just seeing what is this, Acrobat, I think. Adobe Acrobat window. But I think that's also okay. We can do it like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, well, welcome to our short presentation on, well, our research results on the planning implementation gap. We are very happy to present this to this, well, a distinguished audience today. And before I show you what we have done, let me, well, mention that this was, of course, a team effort done by several colleagues from AIT, from the Chinese Academy of Science, and also from ICINOVA from Italy. And well, we have been working together now for more than 2 years, for 2.5 years. And really, I think we experience a very positive collaboration between Europe and China. And I do hope that also our results reflect this positive spirit of collaboration. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Wang Yu. Can you please move on? I still see the same slide at the first one.
Sorry, you wanted me to go to the next page or a previous one?
Yes, please. Yeah. Yeah.
Next one. Okay. Hans Martin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you know, on my screen, I see only the first slide. I guess this will be the same for.
Okay, I just already turned the structures. I don't know what happened. I just, I don't know. Yeah, let's see.
Now, yes, exactly.
Can you see now? It's a
structure. Okay.
Yeah.
The slides on the relevance, were they included before or do they come after this? Yeah, exactly. Go one up, please. Yeah. Exactly. So our research is on the planning implementation gap. So why in smart and eco-city projects? I think we all have seen very good examples of eco-city projects in China and also in Europe, of course. Smart city is another very important topic that I think is of high relevance in China as well as in Europe. But I think all of us who, well, have, I don't know, worked on urban projects also have certainly seen projects that did not succeed, where the ambitions were high at the beginning and then later on, well, the results were not so good. And this was actually for us the motivation to look at, well, what actually causes this gap between the ambition, if you want, the planning and the implementation, and how, you know, which good practice you can find in Europe and in China to make this gap a little bit narrower. Our presentation today will focus on the European examples, and we would like to discuss with you to what extent they are, well, interesting and for China, and to what extent they can be transferred to China. And well, in case you like this format, we would suggest to have a second workshop on it where we look at the Chinese examples that we analyzed. Well, why is this all relevant? We know, well, the world is urbanizing. We know that, well, our societies are getting more diverse and more complex. And this is also reflected in the way how we do urban planning. Traditionally, well, the traditional elements are the land use plan, are the development plan, are zoning plans. They have been used for many decades, and they have their role in the portfolio of the urban planner, the toolbox of the urban planners. But well, we do think that we need additional new approaches, innovative approaches, in order to ensure that the plans will be really implemented in a good way. And this is what our research is about. Next slide, please. And well, in China, we do think that our, well, contribution is maybe of special relevance, as the Chinese government is now promoting the, well, a paradigm shift in urban development from high-speed urbanization to high-quality urbanization. And well, therefore, we do think that the tools and mechanisms that we have identified, well, might be interesting for you, because they are actually, well, approaches that should enable high-quality urbanization. And next slide, please. What we will present to you now is what, well, the outcomes of our work. First of all, my colleague Daiva will give you an overview over the methodology that we followed. And then later on, well, I will show you a couple of good examples that we identified and that we would like to discuss with you then later. So Daiva, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. This is Daiva Walangetang from AAT. As Hans-Martin mentioned, I'm part of the team in AAT and in Work Package 2. And I will just give a very brief introduction, since we want to focus on the actual tools and mechanisms, to the approach and the methodology that we took to develop the conceptual frame to arrive at these tools and methods. And now I would like to ask Wang Yu to move to the next slide, please. Yes, so our methodology, since as Hans-Martin mentioned, this topic is extremely complex and moves along different dimensions and levels of urban structures and urban planning system. Since the aim was to integrate different tools and methods and to integrate different approaches. We had decided from the beginning to base our research on 3 pillars. The first one was, as described also in our proposal, very much the foundation for entire research. It was the review of international scientific literature, most of all including Wolfram, and the transition capacity and what features are necessary for cities to be embedded or to have embedded in order to be able to transform. And in addition, we had a very elaborate literature review from international sources. That is one. The second, one of most important aspects or pillars for the methodology was also the characteristics of socially integrative cities developed by the joint team of entire consortium of this project early on in the project, which describe very clearly what parts or what elements and characteristics are topics and characteristics are typical for socially integrative cities. And the third pillar was actually a very elaborate empirical collection of knowledge from good practice, from case studies. We had defined early on about 5 to 6 cities in Europe, which we conducted interviews with in varying levels of depth, because each city is placed or nested in its own planning tradition and in its own planning context. Therefore, the representatives of cities available for interviews were from different levels as well. And depending on that, the outcomes were also varying. So in the final step, we actually connected all these three pillars. Can you please move to the next slide? Yes, this is actually a little bit more in detail graph that shows our approach. The top level shows the actors and governance and leadership, which we screened in the individual city documents. As well, as far as possible, we indicated from the in the interviews or asked about those elements in the interviews, how the interaction between different governance levels works. Then the second part, activities and innovations. Each of the cities that we interviewed, as well in the literature, we paid attention what parts of the activities actually are really testing and demonstrating new approaches and methods for implementing the strategies. And of course, the third part is the reflexivity and social learning. This is more bottom-up approach where we were looking at the particular implementation projects, how this actual integration, once we talk about people-focused urbanization, how this integration actually is performed on the ground. And the middle part shows that in the case studies, we were making the best attempt we could to connect the strategic level, citywide understanding of different availability or alignment of different strategies, because most of the cities have not one but numerous strategies, and some do have kind of an umbrella strategy, but some don't. And then linking those aspects and the strategies and following as far as possible their level of implementation, of which were most of the times in the selected projects. I think this will become a bit more visible once Hans Martin presents the tools and mechanisms where this becomes more concrete. So that was kind of our main knowledge base, collected empirically from different cities. Interestingly, we also were able to find very interesting sources of literature that actually mentioned exactly the same cities that we had in our case studies. So we kind of have a double validation for our tools and mechanisms. So, and at the bottom line, you can see the points that I already mentioned. We screened elaborately strategic city documents and interviewed stakeholders and connected those sources together. So if you could please move to the next slide. And the outcome of that is the this overview of 10 tools and mechanisms that we were able to identify, which were actually in slightly varying degrees and varying extent present in all of the cities that we investigated. So now I'm pleased to give back to Hans Martin, and thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daiva. So on this slide, you see the 10 mechanisms, tools and mechanisms that we identified as, well, the most relevant. And well, as time is limited today, we have decided to present, well, 4 of them to you. These are the 4 where we found in our case studies, I would say, the strongest evidence that they are relevant, because they were mentioned by several cities. Yeah? This is the Living Lab approach, the Agile project management, monitoring and evaluation, and finally, citizen participation and active involvement. Next slide, please. So let us start with the living lab approach. What is a living lab? Well, a living lab is defined as a user-centered open innovation ecosystem. Based on co-creation approaches and bringing together researchers and other innovation partners, like also industrial companies, in a real-life setting. That means, for example, in a neighborhood. Yeah? Living labs have, I would say, specific elements. One is, in fact, that they are place-based. I think this is very important. No, they can be, for example, in a neighborhood, and they follow well, specific, I don't know, requirements or have specific features. So one of them is, besides the real-life setting, that you usually involve different stakeholders to try new solutions or new approaches. For example, the people living there, the companies well active in the area, or technology providers that would like to take to test new solutions, researchers that will do the evaluation, and so on. In the living lab approach, you usually also use different methods to see how well the innovations perform in the real environment, and also, well, the results of the evaluation can be used in order to co-create solutions, in order to improve the solutions that have been tested in this well, real-life setting. What I think is also important to mention is that this living lab approach is something that can be applied in many, well, to address many research questions. We've been working in living labs, especially related to smart city technology, and also related to low carbon development and urban energy planning, but this could be also used in other contexts. Next slide, please. Yeah, this I've already mentioned. There are several fields of application, and well, it's really, I would say, a rather flexible flexible tool that can be used and tailored for different contexts. Next slide, please. One very good example for a living lab that we would like to present to you is from Vienna, from the city where AIT is based. Yeah. This is the Aspan Smart City Mobile Lab. This is situated in the largest new district of Vienna, Seestadt Aspan, which is built on a former airfield. Well, it is developing at the moment. It will become a new town in the next 10 years. And what is interesting about this Aspan example is that it has been developed by the city of Vienna from the very beginning on as a living lab to try out new solutions, to experiment in a real life context, and well, in a co-creative, cooperative format with the people living there and with other stakeholders. And for example, in Aspan, well, new mobility solutions have been tested. Low carbon mobility, also autonomous driving has been tested, as well as different energy solutions. Next slide, please. The second tool that you would like to present to you is Agile project management. I think you might be familiar with this from different contexts. It's I would say, a general trend at the moment that traditional methods of project management are, I would say, combined with new tools and mechanisms that allow for, I would say, faster planning and readjustment processes. Very often this is, well, has specific formats, very often well, specific types of meetings. Very often this is also linked to new technology like Scrum, for example, a typical tool that is used in Agile project management. And we are also increasingly seeing these new approaches for project management in urban development projects and smart city projects. Next slide, please. One example for Agile project management is a smart city lighthouse project in which we are involved. This is called the Smarter Together project with 3 demonstrators. One of them is in Vienna. And well, I think what is very interesting about the way project management was done there is that they have created really like a project management office organizing activities across different or many departments of the city of Vienna. Yeah. They also have included in their Agile project management external stakeholders like technology providers and like housing companies. They carry out a regular self-evaluation of their progress in Agile project management teams. And they also use the, well, a digital platform to coordinate in an Agile manner at short notice their activities. So also this is, from our point of view, a very good practice and something that can be applied also in other contexts. Next slide, please. Monitoring and evaluation is another tool and mechanism that turned out to be crucial for ensuring that well, the implementation keeps up with the high ambition of the planning. Well, in monitoring evaluation, you basically look at different points in time, how the implementation is going on. If you apply new technology, also how this technology is performing, if everything goes well, if the expectations are met. And if this is not the case, of course, you need to take countermeasures. This can be done in different ways. It can be done in qualitative ways as an evaluation. It can be done also in a highly quantitative way, for example, when it comes to monitoring the energy performance of new buildings or of new technologies. Next slide, please. Monitoring evaluation is actually done in many European innovation projects. One very good example, which we found, is from Sweden, from Stockholm, where a former port area has been developed into a new neighborhood. And there, from the very beginning on, the progress of the project as such, as well as the performance of specific buildings and technological solutions, have been thoroughly monitored and evaluated. And this is also part of the project management. Furthermore, the Royal Seaport uses the outcomes of this monitoring evaluation also to build credibility and trust for the project by sharing, for example, environmental indicators with the general public. Next slide, please. Yeah, exactly. This shows you now, that gives you some example for well, how this is done. You can see well, different diagrams and also a GIS-based platform that show you well, at which level and at which granularity this monitoring evaluation is done. Next slide, please. And our final tool is citizen participation and actor involvement. So this means that in order to ensure that your planning, that your implementation is in line what the planners had in mind with the high ambitions of the plans, you should ensure that those who will do the implementation are already involved in the planning process. This will make the implementation much smoother, and it will ensure that also well, you get a reality check of your plans by practitioners very early in the process. Next step, next slide, please. One good example that we found in Vienna was the development of the Smart City Framework Strategy. Well, the Smart City Framework Strategy is actually really a high-level document, a strategy that describes the goals and the ambitions of the city for the urban development until the year of 2050. And but to ensure that these goals and ambitions can be implemented, the urban planning department, who was leading the development of the strategy, involved many stakeholders very early in the process, not just other departments of the city, but also well, different other bodies like the Vienna Economic Chamber, like also neighboring provinces, like the Austrian Railway Company, like private developers, like university and research organizations, and so on. Next slide, please. And well, this involvement of well, these implementation-oriented stakeholders early in the process also ensured or made it easier to well, showcase well, the strategy and how it should be implemented in 2 smart city lighthouse projects. One I've shown you before. This is the Smarter Together project that shows how the smart city framework strategy can be implemented in the existing neighborhood. And the other one is another example that I've shown before, Seestadt Aspan, which shows how ambitious urban development targets can be implemented in a new neighborhood. And in Aspan, in addition to the well, to the strategy, there's also a specific development company that is responsible on behalf of the city for the implementation. And this development company interacts and cooperates exactly with the stakeholders that were already involved in the strategy process. And this leads to a very high quality in the implementation. Next slide, please. So these were our examples. We do hope you found them well, inspiring and interesting. And we would like to well, discuss with you then later a couple of questions. For example, do you see a benefit in your practice with this? Would you consider using these instruments? And do you have any suggestions how these instruments could be adapted for the Chinese context? But before we come to these questions, there might be some, well, questions more on, I would say, on the content related to better understanding what we presented. So I would like to, well, first of all, thank you for your attention, and well, then ask our moderator Wang Yu to well, to organize and to lead the discussion on the examples we presented.
Yeah, and so we'd like to thank our presenters for a really, really succinct and clear presentation of an incredible amount of information to squeeze into that time. So very elegantly done, and thank you. But indeed, as you say, the real stars of the show today are our Chinese partners and stakeholders. What we really, really want is their feedback on these insights, if they're clear, if they make sense, if they seem to work in a Chinese context, if you have anything further to lend on these matters. So I'm going to ask each of you to contribute one by one. If we could start with Professor Wu Jing from the School of Urban Design in Wuhan University. Professor Jing, are you there? And do you have any feedback for us on this, on these insights?
Yeah, could you listen me?
I can't. You're very quiet.
Okay. Now, now I'm start. Okay.
Yeah, I'm listening to you. The sound is very, very low. If you can be loud, that would be fantastic. But otherwise, we listen carefully.
So I think because I cannot use my laptop, so I just use my mobile. I don't know how to use the Zoom because this is my first time to use that. So I'm so sorry. I just have put the mobile microphone to my mouth.
Don't worry. Well, welcome to Zoom, and we'll just listen carefully. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for Mr. Hans Martin wonderful presentation. And good afternoon and good morning to everybody. My name is Wu Jing, who is working at School of Urban Design, Wuhan University. And firstly, I'm so glad to attend this workshop, and thank you so much for Professor Cai giving me this opportunity to learn the Trans-Urban EU-China program. And firstly, I would like to say thank you again for Hans Martin give us the high quality presentation. According to your research point, I totally agree with your opportunity opinion. Now we are faced to the two changes of urban research. One is focused on the change from land use to people development. People have become very important in the role of urban planning. Another one is high-speed urbanization to high-quality urbanization. In China, it's the same. So we are focused on urban space quality more than quantities. And our research team have started research on these areas 2 years ago. I also agree with you mentioned for smart cities and people living quality is very important in the future. So urban quality are strongly influenced by social, environmental, technical changes and urbanization. And we need to find some new methods. For last 2 years, our team carried out some related research, including um, exploring the relationship between potential and actual of urban waterfront space in Wuhan based on social networks and the temporal of waterfront in Wuhan city and people's behavior based on social media data. Something like that research. According to all of this research, we have published 21 papers and get to China Nature Science funding during last 2 years. So I think how to find and who can apply.
Professor, I'm afraid we've lost the sound from you. We didn't hear that last sentence. How to, what was that? Can you repeat? How to... No, I'm afraid we can't hear anything at the moment. I know it's your first moment on Zoom, so, but no, we can't hear your voice at all. So perhaps if you want to, we can try and reconnect to get more from you a little bit later, or feel free to share in the chat as well, or notify us in the chat if you want to speak again. I'm sorry, but we can't hear you. So let's move on for now, and perhaps we'll get back to Professor Zhang, to Dr. Li Jianyi of the Arizona State University. Dr. Li, are you there? Can you hear us?
Sorry, Anthony. This is Yuan. I actually I got a message from Li Jianyi, Dr. Li. He unfortunately is with Professor Cai right now for this urgent meeting with the local district government. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us this time. He also says very sorry for that, and maybe we can move on to the next experts.
Of course. Okay, thanks very much. So the next person we'd love to get some insight from there is Dr. Zhang Qi of the Wuhan Land Use and Spatial Planning Research Center.
Yes, thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope my voice finds you well, right?
You sound great.
Thank you. Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Zhang Qi from Wuhan Land Use and Spatial Planning Research Center. So first of all, as a participant from Wuhan, I wish everybody is safe at this critical year fighting against COVID-19. Look at the presentation today. I think it is a very, very good and very interesting topic. And I'm also feel glad to join the discussion for the second time. Last time, I still remember we had a very good and fruitful discussion. This time, we are focusing on bridging the planning implementation gap. Sorry, I got the PowerPoint early this morning in China time, and I don't have so much time to read through the PowerPoint, so I just share with you some personal comments on the content right now after listening to your presentation. I think the topic is it's very important. It's crucial, particularly in the context of China, because now the urban planning in China is emphasizing more on the urban quality rather than the quantity and the high speed urbanizations, especially in metropolis, big cities. So we really concerned about the outcome of the urban planning instead of the planning itself. Because in the past, um, a, a lot of people will say that in China we just do a very good, good looking blueprint, and then we just show it to our investors or government to get it approved. But for the implementation side, even though we have some mechanism to guarantee that, but the effectiveness is doubtful. So I think this research is very, very important to right now to the urban planning realm in China. In this sense, to what extent the planning can be implemented is very important. For the four approaches presenting, I think all these four are very constructive and useful in bridging the planning and the implementation in China. Especially, I'm researching on neighborhood planning, so I will talk about the living life approach and the citizen participation and actor involvement. I think this will definitely be useful in the China context. For example, we have done a very interesting project in collaboration with UN Habitat in Wuhan, which is the Northwest Lake revitalization project. We want to refurnish or revitalize this area. Actually, it's a park to more children friendly and residential friendly one. So we have done a series of workshops engaging different stakeholders, especially local citizens in the urban planning and design process. The results turns out to be positive, and for myself, I still have the wandering or jogging with my parents during in that area every night. So I really enjoying the outcome of the planning. I mean the implementation outcome of the project. So I think that is some kind of the methods you introduced in your living lab methods. I think it works in Wuhan context. And as far as I know, like some cities like Chengdu and Shanghai, including Guangzhou, they have done a lot of neighborhood planning projects in this way. So I think this approach is very promising and is very useful and constructive in the China context. I just have another query about the difference between living lab and the city. Sorry, and the citizen participation and actor involvement, because I find some similar or common components between these two approaches. So I'm looking forward to anyone can elaborating more about the difference between these two approaches. In terms of the comments and suggestions of adapting these four approaches into China context, I will say to what extent it can be applied depends on various issues in China, like political support and commodity sense, so on and so forth. Because China is a very large country, and there are obvious difference between in terms of the urbanization, in terms of the commodity sense building level among different cities. Like if we look at the Shanghai, Guangdong, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and comparing it with other less developed cities in Midwestern China, the issues were the possibility of adopting these four approaches in bridging the gap is different. So another issue is we have to look at the mechanism speculated by the China law, the urban planning laws, and the civic code we recently issued by the Chinese government. these two law system will speculate, or it has draw a very clear bottom line and some structures of urban planning mechanism. Actually, we have the mechanism to guarantee the implementations. So how to adapt the research outcome into the China law legislative framework is also very important. For the civic code, it is recently issued for guaranteeing the individual rights in China, which is very interesting. I encourage all of the researchers who are interested in researching urban studies in China can pay attention to these laws, because it will change some local governance very fundamentally in the future. That's some insights I got so far. Maybe I will join later join the interactive discussion with other experts. Thank you, Anthony.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that feedback. It's really, really exciting for us, I think, to hear how much this chimes with your experience. And we note that question as well about the two different approaches to engagement, which we'll ask about to our presenter shortly. So thank you very, very much for that contribution. Sure. Now we have Dr. Zhang Wenwen from the Wuhan Planning and Design Institute. Dr. Zhang, do you have anything to share with us on this matter?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Hello, Anthony, and hello, everybody. And I hope everyone is safe and healthy. And thank you for sharing us the methodology and the successful cases. I saw clearly how the instruments and the mechanisms make the objects more acceptable and enforceable. Because I'm an urban planner and I have lots of the practices, so maybe I noticed my focus is on how to make the projects more acceptable and enforceable. So I think all the methods maybe if we use in China will make our projects and make our the city more suitable and inclusive. And I hope this is a good city. It's a better city for all of us. And I want to share one of my projects in Wuhan. And I also have an urban plan renewal project now. I think it's the combination of the agile project management, monitoring and evaluation. And the most important is the citizen participation and the actual involvement. And it's a renewal project around the optics value railway station. Do you know the optics value? It's follow the example of Silicon Valley, and it's at the beginning of the project, a piece of land want to change the nature from the industrial land to residential or commercial land, because of the surroundings of the railway stations is full of factories and communities, and the factories which was built before 30 years ago, and the communities were built 20 years ago. So all this area first renewal problems, and then we realized that the system participation and actual involvement is very important to help us to make the target here clear. So we arranged two work groups. One group is a leading group, and the other one is exclusive group. And the leading group consists of government developments, just as the management committee of optics valley, Bureau of Natural Resources and Planning, Construction Bureau, House Management Bureau. And the exclusive group consists of research institute, just like us, like the WPDI Wuhan Planning and Design institute. And the other group consists of industrial park management office and patterns, presence of communities, construction units, real estate owners, factory owners, and every week we have meetings once, and after the investigation, we just found that 90% of the factory owners want to renew by themselves or by government. So if they renew this area by themselves, they will build hotels, commercial buildings, and communities instead. So we just adjust our target, not to change the one piece of land, but to promote the regulation of this area. We focused on finding the policy, the path of regeneration, and the government transfer profits to the estate owner to encourage the estate owners to renew the area by themselves. And the existing residents just figure out that they want to renew too. So, and the residents figured out that and give us some suggestions. The old communities should be part of the Wuhan city plan. Wuhan plan just as the reconstruction of all the community plan, and the old buildings should to install elevators, repair and clean and repaint the wall, and add some interesting open space, open ground for the communities. So, and I think this is a good example for all the factory owners and the communities to join us our program and make the goals more clearly, not just to change the land of the use, but to make all this place more livable and more and better. So I think there's something we just want to do better. If we have experts on the economic efficiency to join us, maybe the project will be perfect, will be better. And we need experts to tell us when and which size should start urban renewal processes, because the total profits and outcomes are always changing with time, with the policy. So in this project, citizen participation and processes make us know the potential conflicting early and make us change the scenario of this district. So the estate owners can choose the way, the time, or the policy to renew their new buildings, their own land. So, and the good examples. So, and the suggestions is we want to know this is a combination of all these methods together. So we want to know can you give us some suggestions if this is a complex project? So how can we choose which method to use, or just give us some good examples? Thank you.
That's great, thank you. And again, it's really, really heartening to hear that this is coming through and making sense to you. And indeed, it accords very much with the approach that you seem to be taking. So thank you for sharing that really interesting project with us. And I'm excited to see what the results are.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And so I believe we're also going to be here now from a representative of the China Center for Urban Development, but I'm not sure who that is.
Yeah, I don't think someone from CCUD can join us,
okay.
Unfortunately. We're supposed to actually invited the director of the institute, Chu Ai-jun, Miss Chu Ai-jun, and unfortunately she's she cannot join, and she just asked her colleague to fit her position. Unfortunately, I don't think that is the case. I'm sorry, we have to skip and invite our partner to give some comments from the presentation from Hans Martin. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry that we couldn't be joined, but that's life. And now, indeed, I can briefly stop embarrassing myself with my poor pronunciation of Chinese names and hand over to.
No, you did very well. It's very correct pronunciations. No worries.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Did you say Hans Martin? I think, are we going to hear from Professor Muller now?
Yeah, yes, I think it's our guys and partners. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Professor Brendan Muller, if you're there, we'd love to hear your reaction, both to Hans Martin and to the input we've had so far from the really interesting input from our Chinese stakeholders and partners.
Yeah, thank you very much to all of you. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm very pleased to comment a little bit. Of course, I have to say that I'm looking at the presentation and the tools and so on from a scientific point of view at this moment. Also having done some application-oriented research, not from the perspective of the project coordinators. I will talk as the project coordinator later. First of all, thanks for the very interesting presentation and as well the charming examples, I think, and of course the brilliant comments from our Chinese colleagues with regard to these specific experiences in neighborhoods, as well with the point of that there is a law as well concerning the guarantee for implementation and so on. So I think these are issues which have to be further scrutinized and looked into when we talk about applicability of the issues in the Chinese context. I have a few comments, some more general ones and some more specific ones on the different tools. I would like to start with the general comments. I think it would be advisable to, I know this has been done and the time is rather short, but to explain the problem of this planning implementation gap with regard to socially integrative cities in eco and smart cities a little bit more in detail, as well the objectives and the theory behind. I think this is there and just for our joint understanding. Another question related to that is why do we especially focus on eco and smart cities? Do we have the hypothesis that especially in such eco and smart cities, social integration is not taken care of, or that the plans are not implemented? In Wuhan, we had been to the optical valley, and I think there was a lot of activity going on, so I could imagine that the plans will be, let's say, implemented if not some unforeseeable economic issues would come up, but it was rather impressive. The question for me would be there, how socially integrative will it be? I think the planning and implementation gap may not be as wide as, let's say, the distance to the social integrative urban development. So I think this has to be somehow both aspects have to be taken into consideration. And another point, it would be good to building on that what I've just said, to clarify a little bit more what the hypotheses are behind. this planning implementation gap? Is it really just the communication? We have seen there are many more instruments, and it would be really nice to see more this kind of, let's say, the relation between the instruments and the hypothesis concerning these gaps which exist. And finally, I think we have to take one point into consideration. The examples from Europe are excellent, but we have to take into consideration that in China we have a different political administrative system. And as it was mentioned already with the legal stipulations, I think the political aspect comes in to the scenery here as well. The one-party state, let's say, socialist-free economy, which gives the developers a certain role. So the role of developers in the one-party state may be a fact which may promote or it may hinder the implementation, especially regarding socially integrative cities. So this is concerning more or less the problems, the objectives, the theoretical general aspects. There was one slide in the methodology where we talked about, or you talked about the transformative capacities concept of Wolfram. I'm not totally convinced anymore that for the socially integrative city, that it totally fits. Of course, we have taken that in the beginning of the project, but we see as well that the topic, especially of planning implementation studies, is a very much political science oriented topic. There's a lot of literature and research from political scientists on that topic, whereas Wolfram's concept is more a heuristic concept based on an empirical study. So I think we have to bridge that as well and do some kind of adjustment in this regard to make the topic more clear. So on the other hand, it was mentioned on the slide as well that we want to identify the success factors. That's clear, and that's a very good point. These success factors could be related to the different tools. That's our understanding, of course, but we always have to clarify very clearly success in which regard. Is it just that we think that the implementation is easier, or is it related to the implementation of the socially integrative city? And this brings me to another point concerning the tools. Do we think that the tools are bridging the planning implementation gap in general, or with regard to the socially integrative city? So do we have plans where we see that the plans were very much oriented towards social integration of new neighborhoods, for instance, in eco and smart cities, and that they were not implemented, or are there other questions? So you see, in these general aspects, I think it would be good to have more clarification, but of course, the presentation was more related to the tools. Let me just make a few remarks concerning the tools. I think with these urban living lab experiences in Europe, they are great, and we can learn a lot from them. There's the network activities as well. If I'm well informed, I think China has a similar approach in a way, with super large scale experiments. So trying out something in one large city of several million inhabitants, and then seeing whether it works or it doesn't work, and then applying it to the whole country. So what is the difference there? It would be maybe an interesting question to look at, but I think there are a lot of differences concerning urban living labs as we understand them. And we had a workshop last year about urban living labs, and it was astonishing that let's say, participation from the Chinese side in terms of the applicability of urban living labs was there, but it was not very clear in which way these urban living labs can be really implemented. For me, there would be one question, for instance, as well regarding urban living labs. What is the role of the urban residence committees? So the URC, who are there, who are, let's say, the lowest level of the administration, block-oriented or whatever, which makes, for instance, now it makes it easy to control the coronavirus. On one hand, it makes easy to help. It makes easy to communicate issues which are coming from residents to the government as well to the upper levels of government. But how would they have to be involved? So this is more a question to our Chinese colleagues than to the presenters, of course, whose presentation was excellent. So the next point with regard to the Agile project management, I like it very much, this approach. But my question for China would be as well, who has to follow that, or who would be the right institution to follow it? Is it the developer who has to be agile? I think developers usually, because they are market driven, they have to be agile in a way. Or is it the city government? And if the city government is not agile and does not apply agile project management, what is missing? Why and what can be done to enhance that, especially regarding the implementation of the socially integrative city? With regard to monitoring and evaluation, of course, I think that's excellent, but we need, I think, then to talk about indicators, indicators for the socially integrative city. We have done some work in the project with 12 characteristics of the socially integrative city, but we did not go as far as setting benchmark targets or any indicators to measure really social integration. So if this would be the case, and if we recommend, I think, monitoring and evaluation, we may have to look more into such indicators. And I know one of our colleagues working on urban rehabilitation is trying to operationalize the approach a little bit, and they to check that. And again, with regard to working groups doing this kind of monitoring and evaluation, we would have to ask, concerning the Chinese examples or Chinese cases, who would be the ones who would have to be in charge of the evaluation and the monitoring? Is it the people, working groups, very open, or is it the city government, or is it developers by themselves? So again, there are a lot of open questions, and I think this is one of the points of a presentation, making it very good, that it opens new questions. So thanks for that. And finally, the point of the citizen participation, I think this is always a difficult process. This is a difficult process in Europe. It's a difficult process wherever, because usually you would like to have the people's participation at stages when, let's say, plans are not very concrete. And this is not of very much of the interest of many people. So the question would be here, could the urban residence committees help in the Chinese setting to improve citizen participation, or is it the other way around? Is it more the top-down information provision and so on? So, well, all in all, I think very, very interesting proposals, and I can imagine that they are very interesting as well for the discussion in China. I would like to see, even in our forthcoming discussion now, even more aspects from the Chinese side to comment on the questions which I put here, which would be helpful as well to get to very good results. I think, of course, any presentation shall have or open the door for critical discussion. I think we have to keep always the socially integrative city in the focus, not just generally planning and implementation, but especially the socially integrative city. And of course, with regard to the further work, I think there is enough time now to incorporate all the Chinese comments and Chinese work and so on. So I'm very confident that we get to very applicable and very nice results. So thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bernard, for a slew of very, very important questions. And it would be great to get some feedback on those. I'll repeat them, reiterate them for our Chinese colleagues. But for now, let's go on to Professor Jiaming Xia from the China Academy of Sciences. Professor Jiaming, do you want to chime in with any reactions there?
Anthony, I think he's not here. He's apologized at the beginning, and as I said, he's in another meeting. Sorry.
I'm not keeping up. You're quite right. Okay. And so going back then now to Professor Neumann, let me just, there were tons of interesting things that came up there. Many, many questions from Bernard just now as well. Maybe I could ask you to start with just mulling over and addressing one question that was, I think, reiterated in different ways from our Chinese colleagues there. And that was if you could possibly elaborate a bit more on the differences between the approaches to engage, the different approaches to engagement that you mentioned. Which ones, how do you choose between them? How do you evaluate them? I think this came up from two different colleagues, so it would be great to get some feedback on that. So what are the differences between the approaches, and how do you go about choosing between methods? What kind of things are you keeping in mind there? Those are questions for Hans Martin. Are you there? Can you hear? Okay, so let's come back. We'll keep those questions in mind, and we try Hans Martin.
I'm sorry. This is Diva talking. If I may step in instead of Hans Martin, I'm his colleague.
Yeah. Great to hear from you.
I will try to give kind of this initial reaction to this question. What our experience was from actual interviews in the cities and from our experience in the projects is that Living Lab, in comparison to the citizen participation methodologies, often are applied at a different scale. So at least, for instance, in Vienna, the citizen participation was applied kind of in the stages between just when the project started, the Aspan project that was shown. So there, citizen participation from the perspective not to present finished plans for the area, but to pick the knowledge of the citizens that is available to actually produce and develop the best possible quality of plans. So it's kind of this reversal, because very often in the planning culture, it is, okay, we have a finished plan, it's all done, we come with the plan, and now the citizens tell us do they accept the plan or do they not accept the plan? And that's a very different approach to actually engaging citizens also from surrounding areas where nothing has been built in a whole range. And this process of citizen participation in Vienna, in the case of Aspan, was ongoing for 1 or even longer, 1 year or even longer. There were arts activities, a very different set of engagement to develop solutions that are, or very innovative solutions that are out of the current perception or the out of current frame of thinking. So this is where the innovation is not the exactly usual solutions. So there were even from all across the scale of and categories or different ages, from children to elderly to across different generations who would live there. So, and that information concerning the possibilities, how do the potential citizens who will live there or who intend to live there, how do they see their future there? Going into the future, visioning process and so on, how would they like to live? And not just planning experts coming in and telling, okay, this is how we see you should live. So that was this aspect. And going back to living labs, from the research we have done on living labs across Europe, this is to be seen rather like a container or different sizes of containers. Once it's a cup, another time is a pot, another time is a even larger container that can be changed depending on the context and includes in itself different types of methodologies, like a little bit like we have living labs now in our projects itself. It serves enabling, it's kind of an enabling mechanism to open up a context within which there is like a frame within which it's possible to connect the silos, which, because very often we have these silos of thinking, the developer world, the researcher world, the stakeholders, local NGO world, and to enable this discussion between them. And it's kind of slightly more framed than much more open approach to citizen participation. So I hope I managed to convey some aspects of difference, and I hope that it made it a little bit more clear.
Yeah, that's very interesting indeed. And I really like as well initially this suggestion of, you know, we think about different approaches to citizen engagement and we think, well, which one is appropriate? And we're already sort of going in the wrong direction then. That in fact, the first thing is to gather in open kind of a format, and we can even let the citizens or stakeholders create the form of engagement that's appropriate for their context. So that's a really interesting insight. Thank you. And maybe I could ask you just a further very quick question, because you addressed this difference between the stakeholder engagement, citizen engagement, the size of the pot that you want to cook everything up in. Have you got any thoughts at all on this question of how to know maybe which is the best initial format, or which of these different tools is going to be more suitable for your approach, for your particular project? Is there any guideline or first steps for thinking about that you can suggest?
I am a bit reluctant to say this one is better than this one. I think in some cases both are necessary, just because we're dealing with such a scale of complexity with different interests. And I think it is literally in our context of urban environment, which is per se in itself diverse. To us, the city is the promise for diversity. Mm-hmm. And within that, it would be difficult to say this is the one right thing to go by. It has to be evaluated depending on the context, depending of what and whom and what challenges, what potentials I see on the ground. And what is my aim actually to come out with from this process? And for the time being, we will have to discuss it internally again, and depending on the outcomes of this to adjust our inputs also into the deliverable. I think it is kind of, you know, like a 5-story house. The one is on the 2nd story and the other is on the 4th floor. Mm-hmm. It's hard to say this is the only way to go or this is good in this situation. We might be able to make some recommendations. What was the experience from European cities? Mm-hmm. We haven't heard feedback that these methods wouldn't be successful. They were always successful. Mm-hmm. And the question to me, I maybe would like to reframe it a little bit, is where we are finding ourselves at the moment is on the one hand, and I think this challenge will remain, the promise of strategies and the promise of implementation plans is the effectiveness. Mm-hmm. And this is in a diametrical opposition to, or contradiction sometimes, to actual participation. Because I mentioned before, the participation takes time. It's not always comfortable. It's not always devoid of conflicting interests. It's part of it. There has to be different opinions to come to the next level of solutions. Mm-hmm. And this is the integration process. So it's constant balance. And I think this is exactly what causes the gap, because the participation and the integration process enables capacity to implement. Mm-hmm. And here we are back to the question, who is implementing? There is a top-down, controlled and aligned systemic approach from the city governance, which is necessary. Mm-hmm. And how much of that is necessary? Mm-hmm. And the not so much aligned and sometimes chaotic and not always comfortable process of participation, which brings up issues that are not always plannable. And this is approached, at least in Europe, from our interviews and experiences, in all of the cases in a slightly different way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's great. Thank you so much. So I mean, I was maybe trying to push in the wrong direction. I mean, you're very right. It's, I think, a natural human thing to look at point B on the map and then say, okay, how do we get most effectively from A to B? And I think that your point is that really we need to be not doing that, but really thinking of ourselves as walking hand in hand and tracing the territory and discovering where we are and having this conversation before we start marking A and B, etc. on our map. So that's really interesting. Thank you. Before we open up for discussion, we've got one more input, reactions, thoughts from Nicholas Kontinakis from Eurocities.
Thank you, Anthony. I suppose you can hear me, right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, the colleagues from AIT for their presentation, and all experts that spoke before for their comments. I think I will need to build on a couple of those comments. And talking about the gap, right? Between planning and implementation. One thing, at some point, one thing that I think we need to discuss, maybe not, it's not necessary in the frame of this project, right? But I'm talking about generally, is how much of this gap is because there is a lack of sufficient monitoring or overseeing of these urban projects, right? I mean, okay, I know that it's easy to talk about, or we don't want to talk about corruption or compromises there, but at some point I think that there is a part to be played also by these phenomena, and somehow we have to understand how much of those play a role in delivering substandard urban solutions, if let's call it like that. Now, another point that I would like to touch on, and I think if I understood also well the comments from Bernhard and some of the comments by Daiva, it's about, let's say, the political culture, or how do we end up with, I don't know, an urban solution, right? And what I want to say by that is that, again, if I understood well what Bernhard said, we have all these methodologies, I mean, even the Wolfram one, but then we find out, I think we all find out at the end, that the political regime in all cases is far more important than we want to accept, right? We want to say that there is an independent agencies and science and citizens and whatever, but then there is a strong framework. And I don't want, I'm not talking even about only China, even in Austria, I understand, I mean, we got these fantastic examples from Vienna. Some of us are very familiar with these examples, but then even in Austria, I can understand that maybe in other cities, they don't have these elaborate schemes in place. Maybe the city comes and says, that's what we're going to build and that's it. No, I mean, maybe, or less participation or less discussions about these things. So and I think it could be a whole research question about maybe a whole project, a future project, right? On how these different scenarios of how can I say, of how the political landscape is, creates opportunities, but also limits the options that are there. I mean, and we know, even, I mean, just to go back to China, I mean, we know that it's a different case if, for example, the central agency, say UPD, is involved or not involved, and it's a different case depending on how much the city will define the plan or not. And it's a different case, of course, depending on how much freedom the developer has in delivering a solution, or even simply put, what is your target group? Are you building something for poorer people or downtown, or are you building a high-end solution somewhere in the suburbs? It could be a totally different case on what is there delivered as a solution or the options. So I think it makes sense to understand well how this rigid framework comes and takes out some options, but also maybe puts in some other options like better monitoring, or as it was mentioned, I mean, in the COVID crisis now we saw that, of course, the stricter the framework, it gave the impression that it's the better, for example, it was in tackling the COVID crisis. I mean, it has to be examined. Now, one thing that, I mean, talking as a European now, one thing that always comes in your mind when you talk about China is the scale, of course, right? The numbers. And I don't want to just say, oh, in China, urban development is in big numbers. I want to put it in a bit of a context with what we're talking and put the question, I don't know if it can be answered, of course. It's one thing when we're talking about a social, integrative, or inclusive solution for 100 citizens, and it's a different thing when we're talking about 1,000 citizens or 10,000 citizens. And of course, the average solution in China, when we're talking about tall buildings or group of buildings, is about a lot of people. And by definition, I would say social inclusion or integration goes the other way, because ideally you have to go down to the individual and see what are the individual needs. It could be needs of people with reduced mobility, people with different needs, people with very special needs, or small communities of people. So there is a contradiction here. How can we go up in scale, but at the same time go down to the specific problems if we want to talk about really about inclusion and integration, right, in the social dimension. And then are there tools to scale up these approaches, or you still have to break down in, you know, numerous cells of deliberation, and then somehow combine these inputs and feedbacks in the grand plan? For me, it's an open question how we can do that effectively. And the last thing, of course, and the last comment or contribution I want to make is that for me, a big problem when we are talking about the gap on between what we want to deliver and what we get is that the usual model for most of the developments is to end up with a turnkey solution. So the developer or the city has a plan, and then the promise, and actually usually it's a positive promise, is that we will deliver that, you know, you will take it with the key in hand. You don't have to worry about anything. Maybe just tell us what color you want it painted, but that's it in most of the cases. And that has the obvious, of course, advantage, I'm sorry, that costs are reduced, that you have economies of scale, et cetera, and especially in cases like China, where you have whole suburbs or buildings popping up in great quantity. Even if we're talking about high quality, usually we're talking about uniform solutions. We're talking about replicating the same building 100 times, right? Or something like that. So again, the question is there, how can we intervene in this top-down turnkey approach and create something that is more fine-tuned or customized? Maybe it's the same nature. I mean, the questions of the same nature like before, but I just want to say maybe it's also has a different quality, right? As a comment. So all in all, that is what I would like to add to the discussion, looking from also other development from other European cities, but also from what we have seen in China. I mean, our limited experience and understanding of what happens in China right now. And what Hans Martin and Dava presented, it's an extremely good start. I think it's a very good methodology and approach. But I think also it has to be the starting point for something more in the future. I mean, it can lay the basis, and I think to answer these more complex questions that could also help, if we're talking about Chinese cities, to move effectively from this quantitative urbanization to the level of a qualitative urbanization. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Nicholas, for all those really interesting questions and for turning the lens a little bit and letting us see some of the wider elements that perhaps we missed when we try to zero in on a particular element and then end up treating it as though it's the only thing that we have to think about. So very well reminded there. So it would be great, before we turn over for concluding remarks, it'd be great to hear back now. I think this is the essential point, to get back to the panelists, to our Chinese colleagues and stakeholders with a few of those questions. So I'll just reiterate some of that briefly. Perhaps you have notes that you'd like to address as well from how the conversation is developed. So we were thinking about, from Dr. Muller, a lot about this application of the socially integrative element, right? Are we just saying that the smart city, that citizen participation is a great way to effectively reach our goal of the smart city? Or are we saying that the end result, the integrative city, as well, that this process is somehow essential to it? What's the move towards measuring social integration? How are we even thinking about social integration? And when we talk about a success factor in social integration, what is the outcome that we're thinking of as success? again, to do with the tools that we're developing. How do these tools, how specific are these tools to the context of the eco-city, to the socially integrative city? Or are they things that have a general purpose, or are they things that we can narrow in a bit more on this methodological concept? And then specific questions as well from Mr. Muller about the role of urban residence committees and other types of stakeholder, whether they're people leading the process, whether they're people getting involved later, how they fit in this mechanism. And then again, from Nicolas just there, we heard this question about worrying about citizen participation as being a cure-all, thinking about it as something that can be done successfully independent of the framework, and how that will work in transferring maybe approaches from Europe to China, or vice versa. And then the question of scale, I think, came up for both, for a few different people actually, but from Nicolas just there. How do we think about engagement, which is really engagement of the individual? Well, how does that work when we're delivering solutions at an enormous scale, when we want to do one building 100 times? So a lot of thoughts, a lot of questions. It would be really, really wonderful now to hear some feedback from our Chinese colleagues. So maybe I'll just quickly ask. We could start again with the School of Urban, well, anyone who wants to chime in. So from the School of Urban Design at Wuhan University, from the Wuhan Land Use and Spatial Planning Research Center, from the Wenwen Wuhan Planning and Design Institute. If anyone has some feedback, we'd love to hear it. So that's me, maybe. I should be more specific. Let's start then with Professor Wu Jing from the School of Urban Design in Wuhan University. We lost your audio earlier on, but maybe we're able to hear you now. Are you there, Professor Wu Jing? No, haven't got that in order yet. Well, do feel free as well, everyone, by the way, to contribute in the chat. So feel free to write any remarks in the chat. That would be fantastic. In the meantime, moving on to Dr. Zhang from the Wuhan Land Use and Spatial Planning Research Center. Dr. Zhang, have you got any thoughts on this sort of enormous trove of questions that we've been firing in your direction?
Yes, thank you for all the comments and questions from our colleagues. A lot of thoughts and questions regarding the project. I think socially integrated society is the major focus. The whole project focusing, right? Let me think about this, because I've been living in Hong Kong for 7 years before I moving up to Wuhan. There are two cities of China, but there are different institutions. You know, in Hong Kong is a capitalism, and in Wuhan, of course, we are socialism. So when we talk about socially integrated, the first word come to mind is justice and participation from different stakeholders, something like that. In China, when we do the urban planning, there are two types of urban planning. One is strategic development guidelines. The other is more constructive. It's focusing on the specific land use and the building density and building height limitations somehow, etc. Now we in our society, in our country, we focus more on the social justice. We want to guarantee the fundamental public goods supplied by the government, by the public finance, to ensure, to guarantee the basic needs of the majority of the society as much as possible. So that is that is very top-down. That is very top-down planning type. But now, in recent decades, especially in the past decades, more and more studies and urban planning practitioners start to focusing on the justice and participation of different class, different stakeholders in neighborhood planning, which is very bottoms up, you know. So now in the context or the whole picture is consisting of both top-down planning and the bottoms-up planning. Even now, the top-down planning is very dominant right now still, but many neighborhood planning engaging the local stakeholders, including the citizens, the social workers, the social organizations, what emerged in the past decades, especially, for example, in Chengdu after the the 2008 the earthquake happened, very sad things. Chengdu government has strongly support the local participation of neighborhood development in the rebuilding process. They engage different stakeholders of the companies, citizens, as well as the foreign companies and the social workers from Taiwan, from Japan, from Hong Kong, to work together to rebuild the city. So this is a very, very individual or particular case. So this make me think about maybe in China, how the socially integrated work can be promoted is depends on whether there are some issues or particular reason that can promote or can draw the society, the majority of people's concern to work together inclusively. So this can be as large as a city, this can be as small as the neighborhood, like if we in this time during the process of fighting COVID-19, the neighborhood governance in Wuhan has been largely boosted and enhanced. As we can see in some news, in Wuhan, our mobilization, our resource deployment is largely improved after this disaster. So this gave me some reflection on how we can engage the different stakeholders in the urban planning process. And for myself, I'm still working on the project focusing on Wuhan, how to optimize the prevention of public goods supplied by different stakeholders, not only by government, not only by the developer, but also by the citizens themselves. So the project is still going on. I'm also looking forward to some thoughts from our foreign expert and also some collaborations from our colleagues as well. So yeah, just stop here.
Great, thank you so much. That was
you.
Really interesting. I mean, that's a great approach to, I think we had such a wide range of questions and issues brought up there. So it's good to hear that it's something that's on your mind as well, and that you're also kind of experimenting with approaches too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Dr. Zhang Wenwen from the Wuhan Planning and Design Institute, would you like to have some input there in response to this plethora of issues that have been brought up?
Yeah. Okay. There are two suggestions, and the one is maybe we should think more about the Chinese facts, because in China we have big cities, huge population, and high density of the buildings. So maybe not the cases, not just for the specific projects, but also for the big cities. How to we make the long-term development or long-term strategy planning, and how we can use this methodology. And the second one is about the citizen, the monitoring and the evaluation. I think China will optimize its national territorial spatial planning to promote suitable development, and this planning system for Asian territorial space will be set up before 2020, and integrating the plans for main functional zones, land use, and urban and rural development. And this will be the blueprint for all the governments or all the constructors. So, and in these systems, and the government will who approves the plan and who will take charge of monitoring. So maybe the different level of government will take charge of the monitoring. And you know, we have the 5-year plan, every 5 years to guide the development of our society and urban planning and the development of industrial commercial. And every 2.5 years, we have midterm inspection and to evaluate the 5-year plan. So maybe I think the monitoring of the plan or of the government is okay, but we lack the citizens monitoring. I think this is my opinion.
Okay, very interesting. So good to hear that this is something that is timely anyway from your point of view, and I hope that is an element that there will be success in approaching. So thank you. I see 2 hands raised. Again, Professor Wu Jing, we had trouble hearing you earlier. You have a hand raised. Did you want to chime in? And I wonder, I think maybe there's trouble unmuting. Maybe maybe we can someone, yes, here, we have you unmuted.
Override, so just unmute the microphone on Professor Wu. I think Professor Wu can speak now.
Yeah, I've seen that. So Professor Wu, we'd love to have your input. I'm so sorry, Professor Wu, but we're not getting any sound from you. I see your hand is raised. Do please feel free. It would be wonderful if you feel like contributing in the chat box. If we can't get your microphone online, please feel free to write your comments, and I'll be happy to read them out. Or alternately to contact us afterwards with further feedback would be really, really wonderful. So if you want to write Professor Wu in the chat box, I'll read it out. And in the meantime, Hans Martin, Dr. Newman, you also have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Well, I would like to first of all thank all of you for your very lively discussion and for your good questions and remarks. So there are so many I could comment on. I will, I think, therefore focus on maybe 2 aspects which I remember. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah.
We hear you loud and clear, yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, because the screen somehow disappeared anyway. First of all, well, Nicholas mentioned that, of course, well, maybe not every city is in the position like Vienna, no, regarding good implementation, good practice of implementation of strategic goals. This is certainly right. Vienna is in an exceptional situation. It's a wealthy city, and also it is well, a city and also a province at the same time, which makes certain things easier. Yeah. So even the second and the third largest city in Austria have less, or far less, I would say, resources and competences to implement things in a smooth way than Vienna. Nevertheless, I think the discussion in Europe, has also reached, medium-sized cities and smaller cities, and also regions where I would say resources might be scarce. So I think we also have a very, intense discussion how to empower, shrinking cities or cities in countries like Romania, which are not so wealthy, to empower them to keep up with the current technological development, and also to ensure that they develop socially integrative communities. The tools and mechanisms will be, I would say, prioritized maybe then in a different way if you compare to Vienna, but still I think there's also good practice on this in Europe. And that might be also relevant for China as we have this, I would say, very strong growth in the coastal areas and in some growth poles, and in the hinterland where people are leaving and resources are scarce. So that I think would be also an interesting exchange in a follow-up project, how to deal with these kind of regions. My second remark is related to the last comment on the monitoring and evaluation. Who should do this? I think this is a very good and very relevant question, and it's not so easy to answer. Yeah? If you set up the monitoring in the wrong way, you will have, one person in an isolated position in the organization who will be blamed by the colleagues of, somehow asking for information he should not ask for, by slowing down processes, by causing a lot of trouble and extra work for them. Yeah? So I think this also shows the experience from Vienna. It's very important that if you set up monitoring, it is something that has, political commitment, and you also need to somehow give the person specific rights or specific competences, and make the person visible, and give him the right to request information and data from other people. Otherwise, this can become very tedious. A very tedious job, but I do believe that monitoring, in fact, is very important. And I think our examples clearly show that it is a very important measure to ensure that the planning implementation gap does not become too big.
Okay, thank you, Hans-Martin, for that input. I mean, so little time, so much to say, and so much more has come up even than I think I could have imagined at the very beginning. But unfortunately, we do have to wrap up. For those that are, for some reason, forced to leave immediately, as was mentioned at the beginning, we will have a recording of this, and it will be available online, be public as well. So if there's anyone that would rather have their contribution removed or edited, do please let me know, and I'll be happy to do that before we upload online. Now, we heard from Professor Muller already as a researcher. He's putting on his hat as a project partner and leader. Professor Muller, please, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just very short, because we don't have much time anymore. I would like to thank everyone for these great inputs. This whole activity is comes within a series of discussions during such workshops. We saw this time there were 4 tools were presented out of 10 tools, much more. So it's much richer. The whole work which has been done, but it was, of course, very important to discuss and start with these 4. With regard to the socially integrative city and the planning implementation gap, and to implement socially integrative cities in eco and smart cities, there are 2 possibilities in Europe and in China. On one hand, it could be easier to close the gap, because the eco cities, smart cities, they usually apply the most modern planning techniques, and they are open to new forms of social issues, and so on and so on. So planners there are much more collaborative oriented and so on. So it could be much easier to close this gap between planning and implementation. On the other hand, it could be as well much more difficult. This is due to the focus, because an eco-city is an eco-city. It's not a socially integrative city. A smart city is a smart city, and not necessarily planners would take into consideration social issues as a very high-level priority. So how to balance that? How to get into new perspectives, I think, will be a very interesting point. Then it was raised that there were differences between Europe and China, of course, and I think there's a lot to do as well concerning the applicability of different tools in the Chinese framework, because the role of the framework was mentioned by some of the speakers. Of course, there's different scales were mentioned several times. The uniform solutions which we have in China, which have to be more customized, mentioned by Nicolau. So I think there are a lot of interesting points. I especially thank our Chinese colleagues for their great reactions. I think they have to be taken up. They are great food for thought. So when we more specifically deal with the different tools and the relevance for the socially integrative city and so on. So even there was food not only for thought in the topic, but for future projects. So there were many suggestions which were formulated in a way that they could be real future projects. They could be part of future European-Chinese cooperation and so on. So I think this is very thrilling. So thanks to everyone for the great comments, the presenters, of course, for the great presentation, the moderators for doing a great, difficult, but very great job, and of course, discussants for their inspiring comments. Thanks a lot, and have a nice day. Stay tuned to our activities in the project, and all the best. See you. Hope to see you next time then. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, everyone. So enlightening, interesting. And to our Wuhan special participants, especially. I was really excited to hear from you all. So goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.